Good morning. Welcome to the worship service of the First Unitarian Church of Hobart. If you've been here before, you'll notice that this morning we're doing things a little differently than usual. So there will be some familiar things in different places and some new things too. For instance, usually we do our affirmation of faith a little later in the worship service, but for this series we'll be doing it a bit earlier.
But first, today we're going to welcome some new members into our congregation who have chosen to make a commitment to this congregation by signing our membership book. And so Barb here is going to introduce them to you.
As I call your name, can you please come up here? Carrie DeBusk. Don DeBusk. Rose Quack. Jess Hilsland. And Ruth Halstead. We are so glad to have you here with us and that you have chosen this community, the community of fellow seekers to travel with you and on your life journey. Will you accept our gifts of fellowship, discovery, and service? Will you offer us your unique presence and gifts? Will you add your name to the long history of Unitarian Universalists who spread hope with our living faith? Will you engage with us as we seek to create a community and a world dedicated to love and justice? If you will, say we will.
We will.
So congregation, will you welcome them into the warmth and comfort of this fellowship? Will you seek to add your strengths and talents to the new gifts that they bring us? And will you share our triumphs and our struggles as our community grows and changes? If you do, say we will.
We will.
Beautiful. So let us say together this congregation's affirmation of faith, the promise that we make each week to ourselves and to each other, which holds our community with common purpose and common love in the midst of our beautiful diversity of belief.
I invite you to join me in the speaking of the words of affirmation. They are on the screen and in your order of service. Love is a doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament. Service is its prayer. And this is our covenant. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
So we'll take a moment as they sign our membership book. Oh, you can go back down to the seats. Yeah, thanks, Ruth. Yeah. And another round of applause for our new members.
We realize that not everyone can attend in person, so we are streaming this worship service online, and we extend a special welcome to all who are joining us virtually. The joys and sorrows portion of our service, however, is private, and we will take a break from streaming for that portion of the service. Other than that, the service will be recorded and available for future viewing on our website. We are about to enter sacred time. We are about to make this time and this space sacred by our presence and intention. Please turn off or silence your devices, and as you do, I invite you to turn down the volume on your fears, to remove our masks, and to loosen the armor around our hearts. Don't take my word for it. Do it as slowly as you need to. If you take a little risk with these good people, you may find that they have the same human needs as you do. Breathe. Let go of the expectations placed on you by others and those they taught you to place on yourself. Drop the guilt and the shame, not to shirk accountability, but an honest expectation of the possibility of forgiveness. Let go of the thing that you said the other day. Let go of the thing you dread next week. Be here in this moment. Breathe here. Now please join us in lighting our chalice by Please join us in lighting of the chalice by reading together the words on the screen and in your order of service. I realize we do not have to do this. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We like this beacon of hope, sign our request for truth and meaning, in celebration of life we share together.
So this worship series that we're engaging in right now, we're inviting you to do some exploration and sharing with one another, and it might feel a little uncomfortable or awkward, but that is totally okay. We are not about being perfect. We're about showing up with our best efforts and learning together. Our covenant is inherently forgiving, and even when it is broken, even then we still seek restoration and renewal. Stumbling is wholeheartedly welcomed. So in that spirit, may we lean into productive discomfort that makes all learning possible, and growth and community as well. I invite you to rise in body or spirit to join in our recovenanting as we read 3 lines from our behavioral covenant and respond with the words, "May we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love." So for all the ways that we have neglected to participate in the life of our congregation, may we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. For all the ways that we have not supported the goals of the congregation, may we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. And for all the ways that we have not accepted and civilly engaged with challenging situations, may we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. Thank you especially to those of you who are joining us this morning for the first time. You didn't even know the covenant was there and you're already forgiving yourself. That's amazing. So I invite you to join in singing our first hymn, number 146, "Soon the Day Will Arrive."
Soon the day will arrive when we Each week we have the opportunity to bring into voice and to share with one another what's been sitting in our hearts, sometimes unspoken, sometimes unacknowledged, even to ourselves. And by bringing it into this space, holding it together as a larger community. So I'm going to come around with the microphone in just a moment, and I'd invite you, if you have a joy or a sorrow that you'd like to share with this congregation, to just share your name initially so that we know who you are, and let us know what's on your heart. So does anybody have a joy or a sorrow? Yes. Into the space and all that lives on in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts. May we continue to weave the fabric of this congregation into ever more beautiful patterns.
So last year, my first year in this congregation, during our board planning retreat for this year, we talked about our vision of ministry for this year. What should it be? And part of it was to root our desire to grow as a congregation through celebration of Unitarian Universalism within the congregation and in diverse public spaces. And so with this worship series, we're weaving together our exploration of a few different threads that we've been exploring over these past year and a half. Last year, this time, we talked about some Unitarians and Universalists from history. Just after that, we looked into how our society allocates resources and perpetuates injustice and what choices we can make in light of that. This past fall, we talked a little bit about place, what it means to be a people in a particular place. Just before that, we took a conscious look at the relationships that we're in, what patterns we want to continue, what patterns we want to disrupt. And so over this series, we're looking at what historical patterns and legacies surround us and run through us in this land in which we live, and what choices we can make that might heal the histories that haunt this land. And so I'm offering some examples along the way, but the way for this series to really work is for you to also imbue this journey with both what you know and also the questions that you might have around what you don't know. And so I hope that it will continue to spur conversations throughout your week. At our best, we Unitarian Universalists practice mixing with many different kinds of people and thriving in that diversity. But in order to do that, to truly welcome that engagement with diversity, we need to both go on an inward and an outward journey of transformation. An inward journey that deconstructs our own misconceptions and habits of which we might not even be conscious. And an outward journey that focuses on deepening relationships and practicing restorative solidarity. So in the first week of this series, I raised up those words of Adrienne Marie Brown: things are not getting worse, they are being unveiled. There's a sense of placelessness that many of us have in this society. And so when we discussed with each other this question of where in the world, where do you feel like you should be, and where in the world do you feel like you should not be, there was some wrestling that folks expressed. Should I be over here? Should I be over there? Should I take this job? Should I leave this job? And there can be some freedom in getting to make those choices, but it can also indicate a lack of being embedded in a nourishing place, among nourishing people. And so that's when I brought in that twofold journey that I just talked about before, the inward and the outward journeys. In the second week of this series, I invited you to trace your lineage, where your people came from and how and why, and reckon with the fact that when they relocated, the vast majority of our forebears left behind who and where and what shaped them, in most cases forever. And they had to face all kinds of adjustments to a novel social universe. And in the process, the inevitable question of how much to keep of their own culture came up and had to be answered. And so we explored, what does it mean for the legacies that we carry? And the third week of this series, we got into how for a great many people in this country, there's been this process of sloughing off our own heritage. And there are traumas that we all carry from our ancestors, whether they've been passed down biologically or socially. Each of us are repositories for both the courage and trauma of our ancestors, whether they were victims of injustice or perpetrators of injustice, or both. And there is healing to be done in each of us. And that's a cornerstone of building healthy partnerships across race or class or gender, recognizing that each of us is in the process of healing or not healing from those legacies. In the words of an Aboriginal rights group from Queensland, Australia, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. In the discussion after the worship service a couple weeks ago, someone posed the question, what exactly is the purpose or value of trying to uncover those stories from our ancestors? And we went around the group and everyone shared their response. And I'll lift up in this space just one possible response: to uncover how exactly our liberation is bound up with the liberation of others. Last week, we got into the stories that can sustain and transform, and that we can try to live by, that might motivate us, that might console us, that might inspire us, that might empower us to change the world for the better. Those rivers of resilience that flow from those who came before us, a nourishing heritage of which you are the rightful heir, that grounds you in your place in the world, and the healing work that is yours to do, that connects you to a network of resilience that goes back before you were born. And this week, in light of all that we've explored over the series in its final week, we'll start asking in practical terms, what steps might we take? So these folks that are here in this room with you, we're on a journey together, and the folks who are joining us online as well. And so I'd invite you to just take a moment to greet these fellow travelers, whether a wave or a smile, just looking around the space at the people who are endeavoring to explore some new things, to have some new conversations, to learn some new things. And we're going to discuss just in twos or threes for just a couple moments. There's a question for us to think about, to talk about. So the title of this series is Healing Haunted Histories. In order to heal something that's been around for a while, there's usually some discomfort involved. So the question that I invite you to ponder is, what's a time that you did something even though it was uncomfortable, because you knew it was the better thing to do? And so in a moment, we're going to take a bit to discuss this with your neighbor. But before we get to that point, we'll have just a couple of minutes to just think about this silently to yourself. The question in shorter form is up here on the screen. What's a time that you did something even though it was uncomfortable because you knew it was the better thing to do? So just think about that for a couple of minutes while Jeremy plays, and then I'll lead us into some discussion. So with whatever came up for you or didn't come up for you, or questions or answers you have, I invite you to turn to just one or two people sitting nearby you. And you've got just 2 minutes for all of you together to just share what came up. I'll let you know when your time's up. I do, yes. Okay, that brings us to the end of our 2 minutes. So whether you heard yourself saying something that you particularly appreciated, or you heard somebody else saying something that stuck out to you, I'm going to invite folks to just share that into
the space. If you notice something coming out of your own mouth or coming out of somebody else's mouth that stuck out to you, that you resonated with you, that seemed to be maybe a different flavor than maybe you had shared, or maybe it seemed to resonate with your own experience. We'll just take a moment to speak some of those into the space. So would anybody like to offer something that they either heard themselves saying or heard somebody else saying? Yeah.
So I'm Sarah. This is my first time here. I might cry, but don't judge me if I do. Sorry, I'm gonna cry. Sorry. My answer was coming out to my parents. It was really hard. Because my mom is Southern Baptist and my dad is Catholic, and they told me that there was really no place for me in a church, and coming here, yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. You are welcome here. Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah.
In our talking, I came up with, I help a lot of people transition in my line of work. And we were talking whether they see their family members and they're talking to them before they die, or if they just go to sleep and whatnot. And it's different. It's different for a lot of them. But what was uncomfortable the first few times is now I'm glad I can be there when their family can't, even if it's just, brushing the hair off of their forehead and stuff like that. And a lot of them, we were talking if they see family members and that, because a lot will talk to somebody in the corner. And most of the time that's not when they're home. And we were talking how that is probably a comfort for them because they aren't home, they aren't familiar, and this is what brings them comfort.
Thank you. Yeah. Sweet. One more person. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tyler. This is my first time. Thank you. The main thing that came up for me was that I have difficulty having open, honest conversations with people, especially in my closest relationships. It's really difficult for me to express myself, even though I know that not expressing myself hinders the relationship. And so something I've been trying to work on is just caring for myself and knowing that having those conversations is a way to care for myself, and that I can always try and do my best, and that's what matters.
Thank you, Tyler. Thanks for expressing yourself. Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you all. Everybody who both shared something and didn't share something, delighted by what you offered into the space.
Now, if you would please rise in body or spirit, first to listen to a short reading, and then to go right into singing of the doxology. So please rise in body or spirit as you are able. Because of those who came before, we are. In spite of their failings, we believe. Because of and in spite of the horizons of their vision, we too dream. Please be seated. As Jesus went forth into the roadway, a young man came running to him and knelt and asked, "Good teacher, what may I do in order that I may inherit the life of the age?" Jesus answered, "Well, firstly, why do you call me good? There is no one save God. But to answer your question, you know the commandments. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not defraud, honor your father and mother." Feeling confident that they fulfilled all of those requirements, the young man declared, "Teacher, all of these I have kept since my youth." And Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said to him, "You lack a single thing. Go sell whatever you possess and give them to the destitute, and you shall have a treasury in the heavens. And come follow me." But the young man, saddened by the counsel, went away in sorrow, for he was someone who had many possessions. Jesus looked around at his disciples and said, "How hard it will be for those possessing riches to enter the kingdom of heaven." And the disciples were amazed at his words. And Jesus, speaking out again, says to them, "Children, how hard it is to enter into the kingdom of God. It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God." And they were greatly astonished, saying to themselves, "Can any rich man then be saved?" Looking directly at them, Jesus says, "For men this is impossible, but not for God, for all things are possible with God." Peter began to say to him, "See, we gave up all things and followed you." And Jesus said, "Amen. I tell you, there is no one who gave up house or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for my sake and for the sake of all the good tidings, who does not, along with persecutions, receive 100-fold in the present time, houses and brothers and sisters and mothers and children and fields, as well as in the age to come, the life of that age. But many who are first will be last, and last first." Now please rise in body or spirit and join in singing hymn number 123, Spirit of Life.
Please be seated. When I was in first grade, my mom moved down from Western Massachusetts into Central Connecticut. She got a new job, and it was a time there was some tumultuous family stuff going on, and this was the start of some new even-keeled living for my mom and I, living in our two-bedroom apartment in a double-decker in Meriden, Connecticut. And across the street, directly across the street, was this house with also a single mom, but with two kids instead of one. And there was the older one was a daughter, and the younger one was a son. And the son was about the same age as me, and the daughter was a little bit older than me. And I developed a little bit of an elementary school crush on her. And my memories of this crush were fairly foggy. I don't remember them particularly well. But apparently there were some love notes that were written and possibly exchanged, or possibly not exchanged out of embarrassment. I'm not really exactly sure where they got to or anything. But I had totally forgotten about this whole experience. until I was in high school. And my mother happened to make mention of them and pulled out a couple that she had found, and I was horrified with embarrassment at these elementary school love notes. And so I started tearing them up to get rid of them, to destroy the evidence. And my mom's reaction to that was, don't, no, and tears coming down her face as I tried to destroy these things that were mementos of her, for her, of when I was small. And that's just a childhood love note. The past can be so full of discomfort for so many of us. Sometimes a desire to tear things up, to hide them, to turn away, to look at other stuff. Recalling the past can bring up not just discomfort, but embarrassment or shame or pain or any other realms of difficulty. And part of what was so cringy about those love notes for me was the vulnerability of it, the sincerity of it. How much more vulnerable sincerity for our ancestors are held in their dreams for a brighter future, their eyes sparkling for new possibilities, to advance in the world or at least to suffer less. They're longing to carve out pockets of safety for themselves. They're feeling like strangers in a new place where the trees don't yet know them, where the birds sing songs that they're not yet used to, where the light from the sun comes in at a different angle than they're familiar with. That note, those love notes, they meant different things to different people. For me, it was this embarrassing piece of my past that I would prefer to destroy or forget. And to my mom, it was this treasured memento of an irreplaceable part of her son's life that would never come again. We can approach this kind of situation with a certain ethical framework of who gets the final say, who has the right to determine these questions. Did my mother have more right to keep the note? Did I have more right to destroy it? Or we can approach it with a different kind of ethical question. For what purpose should that experience be used? Should a heritage be used to reinforce patterns of shame or hiding, of division, of us and them? Or welcoming inconvenient truths, even the ones that aren't that pleasant to remember or to hold? Unitarian Universalism values truth pretty highly, especially the inconvenient truths. It would have been so much more convenient for us to just stay Christians. But a couple hundred years ago, we started asking all these questions and wondering, does this actually make sense? Maybe we should expand our web wider. Maybe we should consider more options, more ways of seeing the world. That was not a convenient path to take, but we took it because of our indebtedness, of our recognizing the importance beyond all else of what is actually true in the world. Many of you may recognize this morning's story from when we talked about it last year in a worship service. There's this historical interpretation of this rich man's story, as it's called. There's the obvious interpretation of the story about inequality. But this message about inequality became kind of problematic in the Christian church when it shifted from a religion of outsiders to one that had all the wealth and the riches and the power. And so they tried to reinvent the story. And no, it wasn't so much about this inequality message. And it was more, you see, the eye of the needle was actually the name of this particular sheep corral. And so it was more of like a metaphor where it was kind of unlikely for, and the thing about that interpretation is you don't actually find any of records of that interpretation from the folks at the time. You only find records of it later when the story started to feel uncomfortable for folks to face. But regardless of which one is true, it's worth paying attention to which version, which interpretation of the story causes more anxiety. And why? Why might we prefer a message that is not about inequality over one that maybe is, that might point towards some discomforts in our own day and age. Some of the anxiety about this story in our own society might be about whether or not Jesus is saying something critical about those who have more resources. For many, the primary question that comes to mind in response to this story is, am I okay? Am I good? It's the same kind of reaction that comes up in our resistance or hesitation to look at painful or difficult aspects from history often that can bring up shame. Were my ancestors okay or good? Did the people that I come from okay or good? In the story, the rich man seemed to be so upset that he didn't even stick around to hear the full answer to his question. He heard the first part and he took off running. He was unwilling to make any adjustments to the way that he already lived his life, and he left before he got to hear the end of it. Ultimately, our own anxiety about our own goodness or okayness and our resistance to changing the way that we live all too often short circuits the possibilities for any kind of transformation going forward. But as Unitarian Universalists, by default, we affirm that you, just by being a human being, have inherent worth and dignity. So great, it's already settled. We can just dust off our hands. We don't have to worry about that okayness or goodness anymore. We can turn our attention to more fully focusing on the main concerns of the story, what heaven looks like, and what steps we can take to make it real in the present moment in this world in which we live. So there's this category of theology called eschatology, which is about the end times, is about where we're going to. Oftentimes you'll think about things like the Left Behind series, which has a certain form of theology called dispensationalism, which is actually younger than universalism. If you go back through Christian history, universalism started out in the very, very early days with the Desert Fathers, who were the folks who would go off into the desert and they would eat locusts and honey and survive on that. And universalism came up at that point, way before all the dispensationalist concepts that you hear about now from a lot of churches. This concept of hell that we're often faced with is the stuff in a lot of horror movies with demons and the devil and weird rites and so forth, or the messages that people used to talk about rock and roll music being the devil's music. There's Bill Hicks, the stand-up comedian, would talk about, they tell us rock and roll is the devil's music. Well, let's say that we know that rock is the devil's music. We know for sure that it is. Well, at least the devil jams. If it's a choice between eternal hell and good tunes, or eternal heaven and terrible, clean-cut pop music, I'm going to be surfing on the lake of fire, rocking out. So these concepts of even what heaven and hell is are so infused with just popular conceptions in our mainstream society. So let's peel it apart a little bit and think about hell not as this far-off thing that maybe we get to that has demons that will visit us on earth, but rather the things that we already are familiar with. Feeling like we might be cut off from nourishing relationships. We're not able to access resources to live a comfortable life. Feeling dispossessed from place or from really knowing those around us. Those are aspects of a hell that we often experience, or aspects of heaven that we already experience on this earth. Legacies of courage and strength. The relationships that feed us, the beautiful things that we get to encounter in nature or in partnerships that we form with others. Oftentimes ways of healing that we get to infuse into the people that we travel this world with. We live in a world that in so many ways contradicts our values, and this whole series has been about recognizing the historical roots of those patterns, unveiling them, regrounding our sense of ourselves in the midst of it all, and being able to open up to receiving 100-fold new brothers and sisters, mothers, children, and a sense of home in all the fields that surround us, so that we can build a different world, so that we can develop solidarity across lines of imposed difference, so that we can restore more of that heaven to earth. And to get super practical, I previously served a congregation in Puget Sound in Washington State, and there was an organization called Real Rent Duwamish, and their whole program was very simple. They have a website set up, and the Duwamish people are the native people in Seattle, and they don't have federal recognition, and so they don't get any of the resources from that, and so people organize together, and some folks just donate an act of rent for living on their land each month. A very simple, practical way of rebuilding those relationships. Or slightly more complex and involved, there's something that goes on in Puget Sound called the Canoe Journey. It's an annual thing that the tribes do that started over 30 years ago to revitalize the relationships between the different tribes. And Luke Winslow talked about his relationship with this practice. He's this white guy who wrote, "Canoe families work hard year-round practicing songs and dances, preparing regalia, making gifts to share, and getting in shape, and they canoe to a different host each summer for a week of feasting and cultural exchange. It is a powerful commitment to culture-based healing paths and sobriety, as well as a direct reoccupation of indigenous land. Canoe Journey Herbalists was organized by indigenous midwife and herbalist Rhonda Grantham, who's a Cowlitz native, to offer traditional medicine to support the canoe journeys. She turned her school bus into a mobile apothecary. Rhonda works as ground crew at each stop along the way of the canoe journey, offering care to the pullers as they come ashore and gathering medicines and traditional healing. And so Winslow describes how he supports her work, tending medicinal gardens, seasonal harvesting of native plants, and processing these into various medicines year-round to be shared for common needs in the community and the larger community that the journey travels to. Many of these garden sites themselves represent small but significant acts of repatriation, with access granted by private landholders to build relationships. This model of many hands medicine has grown for years, offering indigenous women and youth apprenticeship programs, providing traditional healing care unavailable to Native people in colonial health systems, and deepening alliances with other land projects led by people of color. So like I said at the outset, in this series as a whole, I'm offering very, very specific examples from my own history, from stuff in society, that don't translate directly, but they're out there to offer possible suggestions to think in new patterns and build relationships in new ways. These kinds of actions, they can feel small. They're not flashy kinds of activism, but they can form the basis of those new relationships of solidarity, new ways of life woven maybe with some wisdom from some ancestors. Just like the story that I told last week about the family who went back to Ukraine and uncovered these gravestones that had been kept safe from Stalin destroying them. A simple act of solidarity just from being in the place where something was needed to happen. In many ways, there's an unfortunate template that has been laid for us of how to behave in the world, of who to talk to, of who our people are. The dislocations of our ancestors wrenched them from life ways that they had inherited. And after they relocated, they had to adjust to new ways of life over which they did not get full say. In many small and large ways, the way of life to which they had to adjust was one that perpetuated a power imbalance and inequality, with some having much and others having very little. And it's determined in part by that way of life from our ancestors that they likely took it under duress, but it's become normalized. And so we have the option to step out of line with that template, to make different choices about who we are, about who our friends are, about who we are in community with, where we get to shop, where we get to join together in common efforts, and any number of different aspects of our lives. But because they might be new, there's a good chance they might also be uncomfortable. And there's just no way around that. So how can we welcome that discomfort? How can we even nurture a habit of discomfort in our lives? When we really, fully take that on, practicing restorative solidarity can last longer than a news cycle, can make you lose sleep at night, might cost you relationships, might take time away from other things that you might be doing, might change the way that you spend your money, might make us disruptive in some spaces that we find ourselves in, might cause us to speak out when no one wants to listen, might cause us to stay silent when we want to say something, might happen when no one is looking. There are so many different ways to live out this path. And I will share some more specific examples in our upcoming email coming out later this week. Examples of individual initiatives or measures that denominations take or political steps. But over the course of this week, I invite you to just consider a question. What discomfort do you imagine might come up for you if we as a congregation were to take some steps towards some kind of restorative solidarity? However, that concept of restorative solidarity lives for you. What discomfort do you imagine might come up for you if we as a congregation were to take some steps in that direction? To actively choose to cultivate heaven in this time, in this place, maybe with folks that we're not used to engaging with. May the Spirit of life come into us and sing in our hearts all the stirrings of compassion that are possible, and cause us to give life, our very lives, the shape of justice, being held close but also being set free. And may it flow on in endless song as we face the future, not to escape from the past, but into a new creation, to weave its wisdom into all that we do. And may that ever be so.
Thank you for your teaching, Pastor. We choose to welcome the Spirit of life and share our resources to actively nudge our world toward a heaven on earth. This month we are sharing our Loose Change for Social Change offering with the Homeless Veterans Program at the Adam Benjamin Jr. VA Outpatient Clinic in Crown Point. In less than 2 years, the Homeless Veterans Program at the Crown Point VA Clinic has served over 600 veterans. Within the vast number spans gender, racial, and economic lines and a variety of challenges. Service injury, transportation, a variety of mental health conditions, addiction, homelessness. You may wonder, doesn't the VA fund services to help? Yes, of course. Housing, transitional shelter, case management positions like Stephanie Dowles in our congregation. But your loose change will help. For example, the 69-year-old veteran with zero income pay the $15 fee for a birth certificate, top up minutes on his phone so he can do a food stamp interview by phone, and a meal from Subway before he heads back to the VA-funded emergency hotel stay while he waits for his housing approval. Your change shortens the time from homelessness to the security of a home. Thank you. The money in the baskets goes to sustaining the mission of our congregation. The money in the cups goes to Loose Change for Social Change. This month is the Healthcare for Homeless Veterans Program. For those not with us in person today, there is an online link for both one-time and regular donations. For your prayers, your presence, your service, and your gifts, we are truly grateful. Another way that we build a new way is by joining together for fun and fellowship and service. We have just a couple announcements this morning. Next Sunday, February 4th, after the service, please join us for a discussion on our church's mission statement. There are packets of material available in the fellowship hall behind me to facilitate the discussion. Also, OWL, our Whole Lives Sexuality Education program, needs volunteers to bring in meals for 3 Sunday evenings for the students on March 3rd, March 17th, and April 7th. Thanks to all who have volunteered for providing meals for the other 8 Sunday evenings, but these 3 Sundays, March 3rd, March 17th, and April 7th, still needs a volunteer. Please see Ruth Halstead for more info.
Sorry, I'm Stephanie. Just like to say briefly that the 69-year-old veteran that you mentioned in the blurb moved in Thursday.
With what?
The 69-year-old veteran that you mentioned, he moved in Thursday to his own apartment.
For those online, Stephanie was announcing that the 69-year-old veteran that we mentioned has a permanent home now as of Thursday. That's great news. Now please rise in body or spirit to join in singing number 108, My Life Flows On, an Endless Song. Please be seated. And now, may we have faith in life to do wise planting, that the generations to come may reap even more abundantly than we. May we be bold in bringing to fruition the golden dreams of human kinship and justice. This we ask, that the fields of promise become fields of reality. After the postlude, we will extinguish this flame, but we will continue to carry it in our hearts. In unison, the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment, until we are together again.
welcome to come into the fellowship hall for parish hall for some snacks, some fellowship. Also, in 15 minutes, we'll be starting a discussion right in the space. So bring in a chair if you'd like to join that.